All right, class, let's get into talking about methods and using methods on objects. Let's get into it. So we're going to talk first about what a method is. And remember that a method is just a fancy word for a behavior. Right? It's doing something. And if you recall, we call a method by using dot notation. So we'll have some variable name, and then a dot, some method. So this is what calling a method looks like. So methods have many different aspects to them. Much like a constructor that we've just learned about, it can have parameters in here. So this is parameters, not parameters, parameters. So parameters can go inside here. And just like constructors, they can be overloaded. So overloadable. We'll take a look at this in just a second. So it is overloadable, and we can call many different methods on the same class. So the same object, rather, can have many different methods that all do different things. If we think back to our analogy of a dog, when we have a dog can do lots of different things. It can run, it can jump, it can wag its tail, it can shed fur, it can do all kinds of things. Same thing in Java. Objects can have lots of different methods that can do lots of different things. Let's talk about return types. So return types are so each Java method has a way to get information back to the line of code that it's currently on. For example, in my variable.sum method, I might get something back from this. But there are some types of methods where you don't get anything back. So let's talk about that first. So the first type is what is called a void type method. And as the name implies, it has no return. No return value. Which means you don't get anything back from the method when you call it. So another way to put it is it doesn't send anything back. An example of this is our system.out.println. When you run system.out.println, you don't get anything back from the program. It just puts an output to the screen. But there is another type of return type. And there are a few that we're going to go through. But right now, most of what we're going to deal with is going to return primitives. We can return objects, but we can return primitives as well. So we can return an int, which sends back an int. For example, if we have string s, and we say, we'll set it equal to something, so this is valid Java. My favorite hello. And then we later say s, we'll say int, rather, int length equals s dot In this case, dot length is sending back an integer. It is returning an integer, and that integer is then assigned into the variable len. So those are return types. And we have lots of different return types. So we have int, we have double, and Boolean. And it can even return strings like substring, right? Substring returns a string, so it can also return string as another return type. So these are all different return types that we can handle right now that are sent back to the line of code where it is, and then we can save that into a new variable. Sometimes we can save it back into itself as well. Voids don't return anything, and anything else can return some kind of value that you can then use. Okay, let's talk about the next topic here, which is how do we know all of this about a different method? How do we know about a method? How do we know what it's supposed to do? How am I supposed to understand what happens, especially as a new programmer and a new language? How do I know what something is supposed to do when I first get a class, especially if it's from a library? How do I know from a library or from a package, how do you know how this thing works? How do I know how length works? How do I know that it returns an integer? I can't just write it and try to guess. I need to know. So this is where documentation really comes in. So documentation is the way that we get information, and it gives us detailed information about code. Now, one of these types of documentation that you'll hear about a lot, especially as you get into programming more and more, is called an API. And that just stands for Application Programming Interface. And essentially what an API is an API is just a type of documentation for using libraries to access another piece of technology. So it allows for accessing other technologies. So a great example of this actually is that Canvas has an open API. And you can actually look up the Canvas API, and you can actually begin with Java, you can begin to make calls to the Canvas API and start to mess around with it and actually look at the back end code and get some of the nitty-gritty details in Canvas through their API. Canvas is very open about their API. Now they do have good security, so you're only going to be able to access your own things on Canvas. You're not going to be able to access teacher grade books or anything like that. But you can still have a lot of fun. You can even submit assignments and look at when things are due and check your calendar and do all kinds of stuff like that without ever actually opening up a web browser. You can do it all in code. We talked yesterday about the adhesive, or actually not yesterday, we talked in the earlier lecture about the adhesive shapes package. So now we're going to take a look at the documentation. It's going to be linked down below. It's also going to be linked in Canvas. And let's take a look at that documentation right now. Okay, so here we are in the documentation page. And we see a few things. Number one, we see class summary. It tells us what the names of those classes. So we see the 3 class names in here. We see a quick description. Obviously, these are simple, so a circle represents a circle, rectangle, and a regular polygon. Say that 10 times fast. So you can click on these. This is just a web page, and it gives us information. So there's lots of extra information that we don't need to know right now, but we're just going to go down to these orange areas. So the orange areas kind of are signposts for us for things to look out for. So first we see the constructors. We talked about constructors in 2.5, and we have these constructors overloaded. So we have the default constructor, and it tells us what it does. It creates a circle with a radius of 1.0. Great. And then this one, circle double rad, creates a circle with a specified radius. Well, that's not super detailed, but we can guess that that double rad means that it's going to create a circle with radius rad. But if we click on circle, it'll take us down here and give us even more information. And there we go. We have information that, yes, rad creates the circle with that specific radius, and it also tells us that, hey, this should be a positive number. We can't make any weird fourth dimensional negative number radius circles. Down below that, we have methods. So methods shows us what can be done with that circle. So we can find out if two circles equal each other by passing one circle to another. We can get the area of that circle. We can calculate its circumference. We can get the radius back if we need to know the information about the radius. We can set a new radius. And we can also, this toString allows us to print the circle when we need to. And you actually don't have to ever call toString in order for it to print. You can just put the circle in a system.out.println, and it will print. So that is 2.6, methods, how to use them, and the documentation for getting information about those methods. If you have questions, always feel free to reach out to me and ask them in class discussion. See you guys in the next one.